Episode 6 of Unscripted Let's Talk. I'm Mary Eggleston. I'm here, of course, with Sarah Schaffner. And we are back with Shelley Sandbulte to continue our discussion about domestic violence and Stockholm Syndrome. And our focus in this episode will be, how do you respond? How do you treat something like this as a therapist, but also how do you respond if you're someone's mother and you see this going on, someone's neighbor, someone's friend, someone's father? I mean, what are some of the responses that actually can be of help? And what else is going on inside of a person's mind who has been convinced that they deserve to be mistreated on this level, whether physically, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, financially, all the ways that abuse can happen. And as we talked about in the past episode, it's really a process of chipping away at a person's soul, of their belief in themselves, and slowly convincing them that the abuser slowly convinces them that the abuser is the only person who could ever love them, the only person who's ever right, and that actually it gets all the way to the point where the victim believes that they can't survive without the abuser. And so, Shelley, you had talked about the trauma in the actual brain. You'd mentioned that in our break. So would you say more about that, please?
Well, something that we learned in the last years about the brain, it's so amazing that when people are traumatized, whether it be war or an accident or an assault or repeated different traumas throughout a life, what happens is people are trying to live their lives and they can't really process the trauma and do their life. So what they'll do is send that trauma to a part of their brain, and there's actually a chemical that goes around that part of the brain called catecholamine.
Say that again.
Catecholamine.
Okay.
I love saying that. And what happens then, as time goes on, if there's something in the environment, I'll just say like a veteran who will hear a firecracker out of nowhere, or even a car backfire, they'll hit the ground or whatever. Because what happens is normally you see something or hear something that goes to the part of your brain where you think about it, but in this case, it goes straight to the trauma, and you're back there. You're there. So what happens then is people are trying to do their life and just live their life, and then they're getting triggered and not really understanding, because they have this physiological reaction and feeling kind of crazy, so out of control, and not really sure what it is. But that's what it is. That's how our body and our mind and our spirit wants to heal and go on. And so it protects us. Our brain tries to protect us until we're able to process that in a different place. Well, oftentimes that never happens. I mean, we're nowhere where we can be safe enough to process it. Or even understand
even know
it.
that it's there.
Yeah, even understand that
know
it's there.
That it's there, that we should take it out.
Absolutely. Or process it, or
Right.
acknowledge it. Yeah.
It's like frozen in
Very
the
much
brain.
so. Frozen is a good word. Brain damage without a hammer is
I like that.
very
Yeah.
is common. Anyway, so that's one of the things. In doing that, I think part of what you do is, educating the person about how their brain tries to protect them and all the kind of things. And when they feel, as many do, that there must be something wrong with them. There must be, I must be stupid, I must be dumb, I must be weak, whatever. And if I can pair it back to them, what they just told me, so to speak, and say, no, if this was somebody else, what if I told you that I how would you feel about me? Would you think I was weak and stupid and Well, of course they wouldn't.
In other words, you encourage them to see themselves walking into the room when the perpetrator is criticizing them,
ripping them apart,
and just really ripping into them. And as you watch that, what would you think? If it was your daughter,
Yes.
what would you say? As you watched her husband say this to her, would you say, "Oh, that's okay, go ahead and stay. Oh, just be nicer. You need to
Try
be
harder.
a better wife. You need to try harder." And unfortunately, there are mothers and other people who would say that, which is upsetting. But let's, for a moment, assume that the person would be able to see that, no, that's wrong.
Yes.
It's wrong, that this woman does not deserve to be treated this way. And that helps them to begin to see that they too shouldn't be treated this way.
Yes.
Yeah.
And to even get in touch with themselves as they were little. I will have people bring pictures of themselves when they were little and look at the sweet, innocent, vulnerable child, and then a picture later on in their life, and I'll go, what happened between here and there? Because just looking at the eyes, there's such a difference. It depends on when the trauma occurred. So getting in touch with that little kid, little girl inside of them, in this case, and basically keeping her close to their side and not allowing her to be treated like that. So there's that other part where we talk about looking at what's going on from your higher self, and then having an understanding while watching. Maybe they're puking their guts out. Maybe they're drinking. Maybe they're overspending. Maybe they're a workaholic or whatever. And the higher self looks at everything and then looks at that little girl back there and the different things that she's gone through and says, well, no wonder I know you're drinking. I know you're using drugs, but look at that. No wonder. So that the woman can have some grace and compassion for what they've done to try to cope with the experience.
So you're saying that the woman who is being abused perhaps has developed her own coping mechanism
Correct.
of drinking too much.
Maybe.
Or spending or any number of other things. And now, of course, the abuser is going to say, look at that. Or maybe she's put on weight.
Definitely.
And she's eating a lot. And the abuser is saying, well, you're fat and look at you and blah, blah, blah. And so she starts to think, yes, I have no right to even defend myself
the air
until
on earth.
I'm perfect.
Yeah.
And so how often, when you talk about the child, Shelley, I think, so how often do you think there's something that happened in the childhood that sets a woman up for this experience? Is that...
It's very
It's
common.
not every time, I know.
Not every time, but very common. And it can look really different from person to person. Whether it be a very loving, strong in their faith Christian family, whatever, evangelical, Catholic, whatever, Methodist, and family is perfect, but there's all these axioms, all these rules, unspoken rules, what you should and what you shouldn't do.
Which how women should and shouldn't.
How women should. Nice girls don't do this. Nice girls don't get
don't do
angry.
that.
Right. We don't call boys.
And you made your bed, now lie in
Yep,
it. If you
yep.
get married, you stay married, no matter what.
Yes.
And I had a woman tell me this just this past week. Two women one who told me that in the midst of a horrific situation with her husband, she said, well, I knew I couldn't go to my mother. My mother would say, we're Catholic. You don't leave.
I told you not to marry him.
You can't leave. You have to stay. You have to work it out. And I think of another woman who told me she literally went to her minister and said, here is what's happening. And I just need your prayers and support. She wasn't even asking him to do much. And she said, but my husband, now her ex-husband, was so skilled at looking good that the pastor just blew her off, doubled his efforts to make sure her husband felt welcome in the church, and completely threw her aside. I mean, it's just
Betrayed by the church.
right. And then of course, now we're going to open a can of worms. There's a whole thing of saying to women, you need to submit to your husband. Just
Yes.
a month ago, and I think, will these lies ever die? I had a young woman come in to me and say, Mary, I was just at this thing, and I was thinking, well, now what would Mary say about this? Because somebody came in and said, you have to always hold your husband up as the leader in the house. And so if he doesn't come home in time, you do not serve dinner, even if your children are hungry. You wait for him unless he tells you that you can. And I put that right beside somebody who tells me that when she was growing up, her alcoholic father did not come home and would throw fits. And she said we would all sit there hungry night after night after night because Mom was being a good wife. And my joke is, I'm going to send all these women's names into the Pope and put them in there for sainthood. Just some thoughts. So, the women that you're talking about, there's so much embarrassment that they're being mistreated.
Or they're
That's
not
my
doing it
fault
right.
If I was a better wife.
Yeah, try harder. God doesn't believe in divorce.
Yeah.
I can think of some things that you probably could have done better. You know, that kind of stuff, all those messages, you know.
Or are you having enough sex with him? That's what I hear all the time, Shelley.
Absolutely. Give him what he wants, make him miss it, or blah, blah.
Yeah, all
It's
these-
just, it's
Wrap
crazy.
yourself in cellophane, meet him at
Meet
the
him at the door.
You should see Sarah's face right now. Jen, you're in the cellophane.
That is a new one for me.
Yes.
Saran wrap, yeah.
Yeah. And so it's no small thing to talk these women through this. And you're going after core beliefs that they have. And you're saying, and they're believing, I mean, you're up against a belief in terms of their image of God.
Their image of God, as well as
Their
then the woman,
parents.
the parents, as well as their husband who they love. That, you know, so when you work with these women, as we know, you have, you know, I'm not a blames, any of that kind of stuff. I don't say nothing bad, anything bad about what a rotten husband or da-da-da-da-da. I go around the back door and let them come to that conclusion. Or like, wow. And just kind of let them gradually go. And I said, you know, maybe your mom and dad did the best that they could, but you still sustained the wound. You know, maybe that's how what they learned. I can take that. But regardless of that, you were still in the closet, hungry and cold.
Yes.
And so that's the part we have to deal with, is that little girl. So,
You know, the other thing that I've heard from women, and this again is, you know, I mean, this is not years ago, this is fairly recently, is they'll tell me how their own children will say, Mom, you got to get away from him. I mean, that's really powerful. Why are you staying with him? But they're so frightened and they've been so convinced. So,
In which you can imagine how difficult that is when you've been isolated or for years you've been told how worthless you are. And maybe before your kids were grown, you were staying for your kids. And
Yes.
then that just extends the time you're there. And by the time, you know, you're that far in, it's just that much harder to leave.
well, and then as you get older, there's the cases where the adult children, you know, he's treating you like crap. Why didn't you leave when we were little? And then if she speaks of it, well, you can't leave, Dad. Who would take care? I mean, there's
Right.
all that double message.
I don't really want you to
No,
change.
don't want you to divorce my father.
What I want you to do is to fix him.
Yeah.
But you can't.
Right.
You can't fix him. And you aren't required to. So, staying for the kids, that's an interesting thing that people do. And people are told to stay for their children.
Yes.
And yet then you're raising them in what?
Environment,
Violence.
yeah, violence and
Distortion and you're
Cruelty.
losing yourself and what exactly is it that they have?
And it perpetuates those generational patterns.
yes, handed from generation
Yeah.
to generation until somebody says this
It
stops.
ends.
And there is that wonderful chance that if you say, I'm not going to do this, he might get help. And we do
Yeah.
actually have, we're not saying all these men need to be thrown away. That's not at all what we're saying here. It's if you continue to tolerate it and accommodate it, they're not likely to deal with the pain and agony that they have inside of them, which of course is prompting them to go into this explosive behavior and this controlling behavior.
Yes.
So, you're not doing a lot for them either.
Well, and their belief is if they allowed themselves to feel that pain, whatever it is, that they wouldn't physically be able to live through it, that it would kill them. And so they just can't. They just can't do it. So they continue to just blow up and control and control. And
They're actually very afraid of their own feelings of vulnerability. Yeah. So, the embarrassment keeps people in there a long time. It's much like the woman who's been raped, and as a society, we don't know what to do with that, so we say, "What were you wearing?"
Yes.
And were you drinking? So maybe it was your fault. I mean, it's that same kind of blame the victim mentality. And I think, okay, so we have a woman who is beaten down. Her self-value is at an all-time low. Self-doubt. And, I have had people come in who it's their sister, and they say, I want to help her. And, the way they've tried to help her is to say, "You're being so stupid. Get out of there." And I go, "Well, you sound just like the abuser." That's not it. I'll tell you what, it's really hard when you love someone and they're in an abusive relationship to say, "Okay, I'm going to gently and lovingly stay in the story." And not say it's okay, but I'm gonna stay here, and I'm gonna tolerate huge amounts of, watching this man act this way, and continuing to say, "You're beautiful. You're just a beautiful person, and I really love you, and I really care about you, and whatever you need from me, let me just be here for you,
Yeah,
because
you're not alone.
I value you."
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You're important to me. You're not alone.
Yeah. And that's really the biggest thing. But it's really tough to stay and watch that. I've had grandmothers talk about their grandchildren and wanting to help with their grandchildren as their daughters are almost becoming incapacitated. And I know you have too.
Yes.
And staying in there to do what they can. So, what are your last thoughts here, Shelley? What do you want people to know in terms of reaching out to those who are in these situations?
Well, I think kind of speaking to what you talked about earlier is that you don't want to act like you've got the corner on truth, because you don't.
No, you don't.
And you need, it's being gentle, observe, quietly speak your truth. And again, about them, I mean, you love them. You can say, son, I worry about you. I love you. You're not alone. But gently, you don't come in like a bulldozer. Just gently and intermittently, when appropriate, when you feel it's appropriate, and safe. Say those things to her.
That's right.
Yeah, and what I took from what you were speaking to earlier in terms of how it can be frustrating to be able to walk with that person and support that person when all you want to do is remove them from the situation. But I think what can maybe help decrease some of that frustration is increasing your understanding about what's going on.
And the whole process
Right.
of it, of what happens in situations like that. So you have a better understanding and more empathy
Right.
for the way that person is looking at it.
Well, thank you, Shelley. And I hope that this has been helpful for our listeners in terms of understanding just kind of how the mind itself works. That, to being kind, being gentle with other people is a really crucial thing to do.
Yes, it
and
is.
to not participate in violence. and having awareness, really, of the people around you. So,
Yeah. Yes.
yeah. And then I always like to have Sarah say a few words before we...
I thought I did my last thoughts early today. No, I just, Shelley, I know you have a full schedule and a busy life, so I just want to thank you for taking some time out to do something for us.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, this was really good. And of course, I always want to thank Sarah and Family Service for letting me sit here in this chair and talk and sponsoring the podcast and producing it. So remember to live your life with intention, passion, and purpose. Until next time.